Hi everyone, my name is Angela and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books of all time. Now, I have loved many books over the years, but these books are going to be ones that changed my brain chemistry when I read them. Books that I feel like changed how I think about the world, how I think about reading, changed my taste in literature, made me feel things that I had never felt before. Books that are just unforgettable for me and define my taste and define my life as a reader. So there are definitely some books that I've really loved that won't quite make this list, but all of these are absolute faves. So let's get started with some books from my childhood. I of course have to talk about the Percy Jackson series. I can't say that the first one is necessarily my favorite, but I don't know which one would be my favorite. Just the whole series is a favorite of mine, and it definitely changed my brain chemistry as an elementary school kid. If somehow you've gotten to this point and you don't know what Percy Jackson is about, it is a middle grade fantasy series where the Greek gods are real, and there are kids who are half god and half human, and these are called demigods, and their lives are very dangerous. It's full of adventure, they're very funny, the characters are very lovable, and a lot of people are obsessed with this series. A lot of people are readers because of this series, and it means a lot to me. And then from the same author, the Heroes of Olympus series, it's basically like the young adult spin-off series coming after Percy Jackson. And I think objectively these are better. It's just the stakes feel so much higher and the plot is so much more intricate. We have even more characters. I actually haven't ever reread this series, and I'm planning on doing a spoiler-filled vlog rereading the series next year, but these books I read in middle school and like very early high school, and I loved them so much. The reading experience was so special, and I'm excited to experience these again, but these definitely changed my brain chemistry. Another children's book that I absolutely adore is the Anne of Green Gables series. I actually don't know exactly how many of these I read, but I definitely read the first 3. It's confusing because I also really love the Canadian movie adaptations, so it's hard to know which books I read and which is just information from the movie. But this is a Canadian classic about a young orphan named Anne who is adopted by this brother and sister on Prince Edward Island, and it's just about her finding love, her friendships, the dynamics in this town. Anne is a very special character. She is very creative and fiery and intelligent. She gets into a lot of trouble by speaking her mind and acting a fool and she's just so lovable and relatable, and the series is absolutely incredible. This is a cozy cottagecore time, and if you haven't read it, you need to go out and buy these books or watch the Canadian movies because it's incredible. The romance in this series, unbeatable, unmatched. Next, we're going to talk about some classics that I read in high school that changed who I am as a reader. I feel like this book is on a lot of people's favorite books of all time list, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was the first Jane Austen novel that I read in high school for fun, and I've read all of them since, and I love all of them. And this one is definitely my favorite. I think it is the blueprint for the romance genre as a whole. I am just in awe that this book is still so relevant and so relatable to people in the 2020s. And I'm not going to tell you the plot of Pride and Prejudice, but I do have this really beautiful edition, and I remember reading it and getting to certain parts of the plot where things are starting to get really juicy and tense, and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know that a classic has ever made me feel this way. And I also got to read this in college for a class where I learned a lot about the historical context and some of the brilliant writing techniques that Jane Austen used. And yeah, this book is just very special to me, and I probably won't reread it for a while just because I keep rewatching the BBC adaptation, but someday I will definitely reread this over and over again. Next up is a classic that is my answer for the question of what is your favorite book of all time, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This book has everything. It is a coming of age story. It is a gothic suspense story. It is a romance. It is a feminist classic. It has rich people. It has big, creepy, beautiful manor house. Reading this book literally gave me a new personality. I read this, I think, when I was a sophomore in high school, and much like Pride and Prejudice, I was like, wow, I didn't know that a classic could make me feel this way. Also, like Pride and Prejudice, I got to study this in a college class and learn so much more about it and all of the very interesting themes that you could talk about within this book, and everything that Charlotte Bronte did that was so unconventional and before her time in this novel. Obviously, I would highly recommend all of these books, but especially this one, if you haven't tried it, pick it up. The beginning is a little bit different from the rest of the book because she is a child in the beginning and you're seeing her go through some really sad times, but eventually she does become an adult. So if you don't like the beginning, just keep going because it gets a lot better, and you might even appreciate her childhood years once you get to the end of the book and see how everything plays out. Next up is a book that I actually read for my AP English class in high school, and that is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I have only read this once and I desperately need to read it again. This is a historical fiction / magical realism classic about a woman named Setha who escapes slavery, and she is being haunted by the ghost of her baby. This is an incredible book. This is the kind of book where you read it and you just sit there and you're like, how did someone write this? I mean, it's Toni Morrison, right? So she's an incredible writer. This book is so beautifully written, so layered, so gut-wrenching. I think especially reading this in high school was a really great way to learn about slavery from an unflinching perspective rather than a watered down public school perspective. I think this one, after Jane Eyre, is definitely the book that you need to check out before you die. Do check the content warnings for this, so just be warned that this book really goes there, but if you think that you can handle it, it is a must read. Alright, now we're getting into genre fiction books that I've read over the past 4 years that have really defined my taste and moved me and made me obsessed with them. So I'll go in order of when I read them. First up is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was the second contemporary romance I ever read. My friend was reading this on our vacation in Florida and she was like, you guys have to read this book, and I did, and it was incredible. This is a romance between two authors at a lake house in Michigan, and they are basically helping each other get out of a writing slump, and they're trying to write each other's genres. One of them writes romance and one of them writes more literary fiction. It is also a novel about grief and coming to terms with the fact that sometimes the people that we love are very flawed. The Michigan by the Lake vibes are absolutely perfect. The characters are splendidly done and you fall in love with them. And I read this and I just had never had an experience like this. I was so happy to be existing with this novel. I have reread this novel and I still really love it, but nothing will ever beat that first reading experience of an Emily Henry book, of a superb romance novel like this. I think something else that's kind of special about this for me is that I'm not from Michigan originally, but I moved to Michigan to be with my now husband, and so it just feels really special to read a love story that takes place in Michigan. I know that's not like a huge unique thing, but it's just very special to me and I love it very much. Next up is a book that I say is my favorite romance of all time, not including classics, and that is After Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This book takes place at a B&B in the Lake District in England, and we have a grumpy sunshine dynamic, also like a chaotic / organized dynamic, because our main female character Eve is very chaotic and bubbly and fun and bright and happy, and she is struggling career-wise, and she gets a job as a chef at this B&B, which is owned by Jacob, our male main character, and he is very, very organized and logical and rather grumpy, and obviously the two of them fall in love. It's kind of a dislike to lovers dynamic as well, because Jacob is initially off-put by Eve's cheerful, chaotic energy. And this book also has discussions of autism that were really, really important for me to hear as someone who didn't really know much about autism at the time I was reading this. And it just really changed my entire perspective on autism. And I was just completely sucked into this romance. These characters felt so real to me, and I was obsessed with their dynamic. This book is very romantic. It's also funny and emotional. I've never been to the Lake District, but now it's a new place that I really want to go in my life, and obviously I would highly recommend you read this book. I actually read this before reading the first two books in the series, and I would recommend reading them in order, but this one is definitely the best one. Alright, we have two more books, and they're both fantasy novels. So first up is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, which I'm kind of using as a representative for the series as a whole. I think my actual favorite book in the Daevabad trilogy is The Kingdom of Copper, which is the second book. So S.A. Chakraborty is a historian, or at least she studied history. I don't know if that makes you a historian. She knows a lot about history, and the way that she builds up this really complex world full of tensions between different factions and ethnicities and like political groups and creatures. This series is following Jinn, so she's pulling from like Middle Eastern lore. I don't know if it's considered folklore or mythology, but I've always been fascinated by Jinn ever since I was a kid, and that's why I decided to pick this series up. And I think the character work is absolutely stellar, and then combined with the intricate world building, it's just absolutely incredible. The politics of this world are so gripping, and then you also have the more like fantastical, adventurous side of things as well, but all of that is tied to the politics. The title City of Brass is referring to the city of Daevabad, where it's kind of like the center of the Jinn world. It's this enormous magical city filled with all of these kind of warring groups and factions, and we're following three primary characters, and you get all of their perspectives, and it's just amazing. I like, words fail to describe how incredible this series is. I gave all three books 5 stars, and that usually doesn't happen when I read an adult fantasy series. Usually there's, you know, only 1 or 2 books that are 5 stars. So Shannon, I love you. You really did it with this one. Okay, we are on our last book. This is a book that I read last year. I actually read this on my honeymoon/wedding trip, and that's not why it's my favorite by any means, because I actually didn't read like that much of it during that trip. I just kind of started it. But I do think it's really special that I chose to take this book, and it ended up being my #1 book of the year, and that is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This fantasy story takes place on an island that's divided between 2 warring clans, and the magic system in here is based on these elemental spirits that some of the inhabitants worship and some fear, and they're very mysterious, and not a lot is known about how they actually like work or how you're supposed to handle them. The island is also magical in the sense that like the landscape can sometimes shift because the spirits are messing with you. I like to describe this as whimsical Outlander, but without as much smut. There is a romance in this book that I really adored, and there's also a plot about some of the island's girls going missing. Our main character, Jack, is a bard. He plays the harp and he writes music, and he's actually been at university in a different part of the world, and he is called back to the island because the leader of the clan believes that he is the only one who can help them find these girls by using his gifts. This is just like cottagecore fantasy with beautiful writing, a good plot, well-developed characters. It has everything you want. It has the vibes, it has the plot, it has the characters, it has the writing. Like, it literally is perfect for me at least, and I was just so delighted reading this. The second book in the series was also 5 stars. I just think this one is more special to me, and even like looking at it now, I'm like, I need to reread this next year because I absolutely love it. So this book is very special to me for sure. And those are all of my official favorite books of all time. There are some genres that I read a lot of that aren't represented here, like mystery books. I just haven't had any mystery books that I absolutely love so much that they've kind of changed my life a little bit. But if you got to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more bookish content from me, and I hope you had a lovely week.